Welcome to the Real Estate Brief. I'm Adam, and today we're cutting through the noise. We're going to get to the truth that we can find inside of the news. We're going to look at the data, and I'm going to give you some of my observations and where I truly believe you can find opportunity, because I do believe that. I think in every headline and every catch-a type of headline out there that there is an opportunity if we just kind of extract where that is, right? And I believe we can find it today in some of these articles on how to navigate this real estate business that we find ourselves in. So if you're ready to gain your real estate edge, let's dive into our very first story. And we're going to begin with an article by RIS Media, rismedia.com. Big fan of them. They are strictly in real estate news. That's what they talk about. Them and Inman are two industry industry specific news sources. There, I got it out. Those are what they are, and they're great resources. Now, there's a lot of opinion pieces inside of there. So you got to kind of pay attention to what they are and don't get caught up that they're, actually just news. Sometimes there are opinion pieces in there. So pay attention to that as you're reading the news. That is important. We're going to begin with an article that says inflation hits new lows as 2026 outlook brightens. And the statement says housing economists are cautiously optimistic, noting that lower inflation and a surprisingly resilient labor market could spark a resurgent housing market in the near term. Okay. So what they're going to be talking about in this article, just kind of summarize it real quick, and then we'll get into the meat of this, is that what they're seeing is that inflation is finally cooling to levels we haven't seen in a few years. And that 2026 is kind of outlook. The outlook there is shifting from kind of like this, where I'm just kind of surviving and not knowing if I can afford a home because it's just going through the roof, to now where there's actually an opportunity here to be able to go out there and buy without having to pay over month, right? So we're getting closer where that inflation is not going crazy. So, and to be honest, this headline and this article is optimistic, but it's not overly optimistic. It's a cautious tale, if you will. And it's going to be talking about kind of how this this inflation slowing down and cooling is actually going to be beneficial for the real estate market in 2026. And that's what we're going to see. All right. So let's go ahead and get into this and break this down just a little bit. This is by Claudia Larson, written February 13th, 2026. All right. She begins with saying, January appears to be looking up in terms of inflation as the latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics saw the Consumer Price Index, that's the CPI, hit a low for both inflation and core inflation. All right. The CPI for January saw a 0.2% increase in the all items index, landing annual inflation at 2.4%. All right, this is down from 2.7% in both December and November, and the lowest level since last May, according to Bright MLS chief economist Lisa Sturdivant. December's monthly rise was attributed to a 0.2% rise in the shelter index. Now, it's a lot of numbers and stuff in there. Here's just to summarize kind of what's happening here, and it's not too hard to understand, is when you have a high inflation month over month, the homes are getting overpriced for the market, and that causes interest rates to hold where they are. Okay, if we just get down to the bare bones of what was just said there, it's that they're trying to bring that inflation down to that 2% mark as close as they possibly can. When they can do that, you've got a good seller market. It's a stable seller market where the owners of the homes are still gaining equity in their houses. But at the same time, it's not outpacing the income growth of the consumer. And that's the balancing that they're trying to bring to the table here. So when the reason why this is kind of a hopeful optimism is because it is getting closer to those numbers that they're trying to get to, which when you do get to that point, you have a stable market where everybody can kind of negotiate, buyers and sellers. Everybody's kind of making some money here. Banks, as far as their loans are concerned, they're making good money. So it's a balancing of the market. So this is why it's hopefully optimistic, right? So just keep that in mind as we kind of go through this. It literally begins with that. Housing economists were cautiously optimistic, noting that lower inflation and a surprisingly resilient labor market could spark a resurgent housing market in the near term. All right, we're going to keep on going down just a little bit. Taken together, this is a quote, taken together, this was a solid report. He continued, January is notoriously tricky because of seasonality, so it is important not to overact to 1 month. While the broader direction remains encouraging, inflation is not low enough for policymakers to declare victory either. So there's still, this is that caution element about the optimism, right? They feel like it's probably heading in that direction. Seasonality would play a big factor in that. But we can go back 6 months. I've been talking about this now for a few weeks. It's like we can go back month over month and we can kind of see a good trend. And we can take that trend and compare it to this same time last year and the past few years. And you can take that data and come to some kind of understanding about what could be happening in 2026. But again, with it being an industry that it affects so many other industries, one shift in one location could cause something else to shift. So something could happen and derail any kind of momentum that we've got. But with all that being said, I think we're still kind of seeing a balancing. If everything was to stay where it needs to stay, I think that's what we're going to see. I think we're going to see more of a stabilization in the market. And that's kind of what they're getting at here. It says, just a month or two ago, there was talk of stagflation, or a combination of high inflation and high unemployment. Now, is it possible we're going to have a Goldilocks economy where unemployment is low and inflation is coming down, she said. It's probably a little too soon to call, and the economic data for February and March will be important signals. And this is what we're going to watch. I'm going to be doing that a lot here on this live stream. I'm going to be talking about kind of watching this month over month and seeing what's happening with inside of the data to see as we go into spring how that correlates in regards to what happened the past spring and the past few years. That's going to tell us a big story about what the rest of the year is going to look like. So these next few months are going to be pretty crucial to kind of give us some good solid data to go from to be able to make more predictions on what might be happening in the market. Now, I will say, as I've been doing this, and the more we do this, the more we talk about this, the better we get at understanding it. And I will say, like, you've seen a couple months where inflation stayed very close to about the same, but you've not seen a big, massive spike. It's been very steady. So, and I think what the feds, and not to try to get into their minds and be a mind reader per se, but what would make sense to me is that they're looking at that inflation, and they kind of said this, is they're looking at that inflation and they're okay with leaving that interest rate where it is, and even leaving this inflation where it is without adjusting the rates. And the reason being is you want that income threshold to kind of catch up just a little bit. And once that begins to happen, and you had less homes on the market, and there's a moment where those two areas are going to kind of come together. And once that begins to happen, what you're going to see is that inflation is going to drop just a little bit more. And once that happens, that's when the feds are going to be looking at the rates and deciding if they want to do anything else with those rates. Do they want to go down or do they want to go up? So what would happen, though, is if the inflation starts building back up, they're going to either hold or they're going to increase just a little bit. Now, I've been saying this, and I could be completely wrong, but I don't think we're going to see massive fluctuations on the interest rate in 2026, maybe not even 2027. I think there's an element of the emotional psyche that you need to have kind of take place in the American consumer to say that it's a stable market, to build the confidence back up to be able to enter into the market. So I think that's what we're going to see. All right, in terms of housing, shelter inflation, which measures rent and owner's equivalent rent for homeowners, was up 0.2% year over year. Policymakers and economists have largely agreed that housing inflation is on the right track, with some arguing the lagging nature of data collected by the CPI provides a case for further rate cuts. So there's some that will say that we need more rate cuts to cause certain things to happen and move more properties and get more buyers into the market. We will see, though. Krimmel said that even with inflation moving in the right direction at the moment, nearly 5 years of elevated price growth have partially eroded income gains and weighed on consumer confidence. Now, I will put heavy emphasis on that word right there, okay? Consumer confidence. To be honest, when you start looking at this kind of data, I like data, but data can't tell you the emotional state. It can show you kind of some metrics about what the emotional state is, and it can show you where it is, but really time gives you the evidence on what the emotion is. So this is why I'm leaning into saying, like, the Fed's probably not going to do much. They're probably not going to do much because they want to build that consumer confidence in the market, right? That's what they're looking for. So we'll see. The quote, the foundation for a housing rebound may be taking shape, but rebuilding confidence and moving the needle on affordability will require a sustained stretch of lower inflation and a more certain labor market. Those are the two metrics, right? I mean, if the labor market is not increasing and income wages aren't going up and inflation continues to go up, you have less and less affordability going on. So that's the problem. You got to do something to address those two to get them to meet in the middle. Just as if we were negotiating a deal, we've got to figure out how to bring the two parties together. Those are the opposing parties, right? You've got the labor market, which is the income of the consumer to be able to buy, And then you got the product being built and the cost of that product to be bought. So they got to get together. And so the easiest thing you can mess around with is the rate, right? That is the thing you can address the most. All right, quote, mortgage rates are already at about a 3-year low, and home buyers and sellers are taking notice, she said. Lower rates and slower home price growth means improved affordability, which will bring out more buyers and sellers, fueling a relatively upbeat spring housing market. So that's the prediction. That's kind of the prediction. She's kind of giving you an idea about what might be coming. I would say if all metrics and everything we have currently going happens and stays the way it is, I would say it's probably highly likely. I would say it's very highly likely. Now, let me give you just some thoughts here. Economists are projecting a more robust spring and summer market, but it's still a cycle market, and we're going into still a major shift. I don't think you're going to see too many things on one side or the other. You're not going to see a lot of new homes being put on the market, and you're not going to see a huge amount of influx of buyers. I think you're just going to see more of a stable type market kind of taking place, at least in 2026. And maybe towards the end of 2026, you could see a major shift. But given what we are seeing in the market, I just don't see anything drastic happening. So as a real estate agent, what kind of action items would I encourage you to do inside of this kind of data and this kind of information? What I would encourage you to do is go back into your CRM or your database or your lead pool, or wherever you keep your records at. Look at 24 and 25 buyers and talk to them about where they're currently at. Because back then, if they did not buy then, that's because the inflation was going really high and it was still pretty high price and the income has not caught back up. Revisit those leads, because with all this kind of stuff happening, that's where you're going to find some opportunity. Those 24, 25 buyers that did not buy, there's some money to be had there. I really do. The same thing could be said even about your sellers. Just as an offer and a service to them, I would call them and talk about the rates and what's going on. They might have a 7 to 8% interest rates on their home. That's a good touch just to reach back out to them. Maybe even life circumstances have happened and they need to make a shift, right? That could be a factor as well. So giving them a call and touching base with them on those two things is offering a service and a value to them, even not really asking for, a listing or anything, just helping them navigate their house and their finances, just because you're paying attention to what's going on in the market. A lot of consumers, and just keep this in mind, they're not listening to what we're talking about here. They read the headline, maybe the first paragraph or two, and then they make a decision based on that. And it's usually an emotional based decision. They're not thinking through all the logistical steps that maybe now is a good time to sell given the current state of the market and what inflation and their income looks like, or their life circumstances, right? Those are factors that we need to be thinking through to make the touches with previous clients. We need to be definitely honing in on that. There's opportunity there. In any kind of shift, there's an opportunity. We just need to know exactly where to go to find it, right? Now, I would also encourage you to do this is, like, if you are into social media and you're doing a lot of social media, I would take information like this and create some kind of graphic talking about the state of the economy and what is actually going on. Make some kind of correlation between what the lower inflation means in regards to housing, a stability and affordability, right? Like, what's the correlation between that? And then when you start talking about the inflation of a home versus the income of the consumer, get into the data a little bit and provide value back on your social media accounts, talking about how those two things come together. Figure out a way to do that. I think you'll find that to be more beneficial in your social media posts than just going out there and throwing things and, bragging about your trophies and how great you are. Sorry, but you need to do that. I get it, marketing, but I would lean heavily into offering something of value. And I think this is an opportunity when you're going through a shift like this. Your consumer is not paying attention. Okay, they're just not paying attention to this. So, to summarize this, the wait and see mentality. When you start saying, people start talking about this, and I had somebody make a comment on one of my videos, said, "I'm going to wait until it's 3%," and then it said, "I think everybody should wait until it's 3%." Well, we all know that was probably once in a lifetime interest rate. Highly unlikely we will ever see that again in our lifetime. Could happen, but I'm just saying it's very unlikely. So that advice to wait and see, That's just not what we're seeing here. That's not what we're seeing here. Okay, with that being said, let's jump into the article number 2. Article number 2. Well, actually, you know what? I'm going to pause for just 1 second because there is the housing bill that was passed, and let me I'm gonna shift gears slightly. Sorry, guys, this is not going to be the second article of this live stream. I'm gonna pivot just slightly. There was a bill that passed in regards to addressing the housing affordable sector, and I'm gonna post a link to this bill inside of the YouTube channel description. I would encourage you to take some time to go through this and see what this bill means in regards to housing affordability and the housing industry as a whole. Take some time to read through this. You know, one of the cool things we do have at our advantage is AI. And a lot of AIs can take PDFs and you can go in there and ask it to, hey, pull out the most, important details of a bill or of this bill, like a PDF, and extract things relevant to real estate agents or the housing industry, right? And it can extract that information for you and help kind of give you some information about what's actually to come. And there is a lot of information going on that's been passed in this bill. And this bill has a lot of things that's actually going to be innovative into addressing many, many sectors. And it was a bipartisan bill. It was not just a bill that was passed by one party. It was a bipartisan bill because both parties, no matter which side of the aisle you land on, both parties understand that there's a housing affordability issue. And the reality is you do not fix a housing issue with one magic pill or silver bullet. It just doesn't happen. You have to make micro changes. I mean, you could make drastic changes, but that tilts that pendulum way too far and causes that crash or recession or things like that. It's better to make small micro changes. And oddly enough, I actually I have a couple live streams where I actually broke down this bill a little bit better. And I'm going to take this PDF and I'll post it up on my Linktree link, and I'll share that later. But you guys can go through this, and this is just some of the key elements inside of that PDF. I did what I just advised you guys to do: is take that PDF and upload it to AI and pull out some information. And then this is also coming from a couple live streams that I did as well. So read through these type of things and understand what's coming. Now, all of these reforms and all these changes will take time to kind of happen. That it's not going to be instant. I mean, it's the government. It takes a long time for certain things to be implemented. But this is kind of where we are heading in regards to the housing industry. And there's a lot of things addressed in this. I mean, if you look at this, new building forms and designs, point access block buildings, manufactured housing, pattern books. I've talked about this multiple times on the live stream, talking about what this is. The pattern books basically is the idea that there are set designs for multi-housing buildings that are already approved and granted. So think about ADUs, duplexes, triplexes, all those type of things, townhouses that significantly speed up the requirements to get approval through zoning. So there's already designed building blocks and books, and now they're tweakable. The design on the outside could look differently, but the inside is a standardized, approved already type of building. So that way you can go in, submit your for approval, and rush it through because you're using what they're calling pattern books. So that's another thing. And also reducing the cost. Another factor here too is reducing the cost of building and manufacturing, cutting down on some of the regulations that just didn't make any sense. So there's a lot of stuff in here that had not been addressed since I think 97. So they've made a lot of improvements in regards to what this is. And then there's also like this FHA small dollar mortgage. Before, it was really hard to for those that wanted to, qualify and buy a house for $100,000 or less, it was hard for them to find those homes. Well, they've addressed that. They have an FHA program that's talking about those that want to buy and finance homes under $100,000, right? Now, the challenge is going to be building those type of homes. There's multifamily loan limits, modernizing development programs where they have like reform for eligibility for home funded projects, infill and rehabilitation streamlining, publicly owned land database, tenant and homeowner protections, and voucher inspection efficiency. And there's many, many other things inside of here as well. This is just a few of those items, but it's a big, big bill. It's a big thing, and it's something to pay attention to. I think what I'll do is I'm going to work through this bill, and I'll have a live stream kind of breaking down line by line certain information again. All right. Sorry for the bunny trail, but I thought it'd be kind of worth our time to kind of just quickly throw that out there. All right, this next article is talking about 3 market forces to watch in 2026. Okay, 3 market forces to watch in 2026. And this is actually from Florida Realtors. And Florida Realtors, I mean, look, they have a news site, and I've quoted them a few times. I'm not sure exactly where they're pulling their data, but they've got people writing good articles and fair articles. And I keep kind of coming back to them because they keep pushing out more and more things. I mean, what they're saying is really good. But what they're saying here is they're flagging 3 specific forces that will define this year's housing market. And it's very easy to fall into the trap of all the headlines and not really pay attention. So what they're trying to do in this article is focus on 3 factors only. And these are the ones that are probably, according to them, that's going to move the needle for your business one way or the other the most. Okay, so that's what they're going to be getting into here. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into this one. All right, so 3 market forces to watch in 2026. This is by Vincent Salandro. It says consumer confidence, mortgage rate trends, and shifts in federal policy could play a key role in shaping housing demand and pricing in 2026. And this is interesting. It says New York. So this is coming from somewhere. So they're getting this article from somewhere. I don't know if it says where. The Paris Post, intelligent, all rights reserved. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, it's not a very long article, so it won't take us long to get through this. But let's just kind of highlight a few key things here. It says, what was anticipated as a bounce back year for the housing market in 2025 never materialized. Rate cuts from the Fed did not occur as early in the year as expected. Policy uncertainty sidelined many buyers, and affordability constraints remained despite inventory in the new home sector increasing. Given how the year transpired, builders and buyers alike are likely more than happy to put 2025 in the rearview mirror. Ahead of the 2026 spring selling season, typically the most active period of the year for home builders, several dynamics are shaping the market and how buyers will experience the home shopping experience. All right, so let's go into this. It says number 1. So these are the 3 categories. 1 is consumer confidence, 2 is mortgage rates, and 3 is federal policy. So these are 3 main market shifts that they're going to say that it's going to have the most impact. And this makes sense. And we just talked about this earlier. Is this number 1 right there, that consumer confidence level? Guys, that is a massive factor in the housing market. If the consumer doesn't have confidence, and given that is an emotional state of the consumer, if they don't have confidence in the market, they're not going to buy or sell, right? And then when you have all this uncertainty and all this wavering in rates and all the talk and all this kind of stuff, it causes more uncertainty. It diminishes the confidence. All right. So economic uncertainty, looming tariffs, and the general strain of inflation weighed on consumers for much of 2025. These concerns were not aided by a slowing labor market, job security concerns, and rumors and employee layoffs at several large companies. At the same time, the overall cost of living crept higher while prices in the new and existing home markets remained elevated. Taken together, consumer confidence fell to its second lowest reading on record in December, according to the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index. So that's an interesting statistic right there. However, just because sentiment was weak in 2025 does not mean it will remain that way in 2026. A few positive jobs reports or the sense that inflation is softening for day-to-day items like groceries and gas could help shift sentiment in a more positive direction. So that's exactly what we're talking about. We're reiterating exactly what we just discussed earlier, is when you start having this slow changes, these micro changes in the market, not messing with that rate too much, not causing a major aggressive tactics on the federal side in regards to regulations and policies, letting the market kind of simmer a little bit and adjust and settle in, even though you would love for things to be really good and moving fast and doing these type of things. This is where wisdom comes in, right? This is wisdom at play. And I would agree that you've got to kind of let things simmer, especially over the past few years. It's been a wild ride. All right, mortgage rates. Mortgage rates are notoriously difficult to forecast, and their fluctuation makes it difficult to draw conclusions on a week-to-week basis. Yeah, look, this is the whole thing. Is like if you're a buyer out there and you're playing the mortgage rate game, you got to stop, because that's like going to try to play the lottery. The reality is the economy is stable to some degree. The inflation is still happening. So every single month that you wait, that you're losing 2 to 3% of equity in your home. you're not necessarily locked into the rate. You can always refinance. So the whole idea of like playing the mortgage rate waiting game, guys, it's so overdone. Like, now is the time to buy. I mean, time is on your side when it comes to real estate. You have history. I'm not saying that crashes don't happen, but in the end, even when the crash happens, you still have a home. And then when that crash, on the other side of a crash, you then have a tsunami that just kind of takes off and it goes crazy with the inflation side of things. It's the way it works. So don't play the mortgage rate game. Don't do it. All right. It says, while the general consensus is that mortgage rates will remain within a band of 5.75 and 6.6 in 2026, changes in rates will likely be driven by inflation, the labor market, Federal Reserve policy, the 10-year Treasury yield, and demand for mortgage-backed securities. There's also a growing sense that lower rates alone may not be enough to entice hesitant buyers off the sidelines. Lower rates coupled with improved consumer confidence, though, could re-accelerate the market. So that's a good argument. Packaging the two, having everything stay stable nullifies or at least minimizes the mortgage rate concept, right? I feel confident that the market's good. Probably not going to change much on the interest rate. Why am I waiting? I need to change my life circumstances. I need to go ahead and move forward, right? So that makes sense. All right. And third, they say at the onset of 2025, the focus of the administration appeared focused on streamlining regulations to encourage development by builders. As 2025 progressed, new things to watch were introduced as additional layers of uncertainty emerged in the housing market. Several policy discussions that emerged in 2025, including immigration reform, tariffs, and Liberation Day, the proposal of a 50-year mortgage, and the claim that builders were driving unaffordability by sitting on lots, will spill over and impact the market in 2026. After a volatile 2025, the housing market remains sensitive to both economic signals and legislative shifts. Now, let me just pause for just a second. The argument that's being had there, I'm going to push back against it a little bit. On the surface, you would look at that and you would say, yeah, okay, tariffs, Liberation Day, the proposal of 50-year mortgage, and all these claims and all this kind of stuff was rhetoric that created a consumer that didn't have as much confidence. Okay, don't disagree. That's not the part where I would disagree. Where I would disagree as if this was a bad thing. When you're in a position and you're trying to navigate a situation without solid answers, because you can't predict. If I make a decision here, I cannot foretell every single scenario on where and how that plays out. It's impossible to do that. I can look at all the data in the world, but I can't predict human behavior. I can't predict the external things that go on outside of the country, outside of my state. I can't predict all that to make a decision. But what is the process of trying to make a decision? It's called discussion, civil discourse, throwing things out. Yeah, knowing that there's going to be a moment where there's some contention, there's a stress, and there's an emotional response to what is being thrown out. But when you throw something out and then it has time to have that response, it gives you some very empirical data to be able to make a better decision. If I float an idea, like they use the example of a 50-year mortgage, okay? We all know that 50-year mortgage puts somebody in debt for a long amount of time and pays very little equity off of the house. So as in real estate, we know those numbers. We understand them. But what would happen by floating the idea of a 50-year mortgage, you get to hear the consumer sentiment in response to it, which then tells you, that's a good idea, or that's a bad idea. So this is how you work through a situation. It's not about just making decisions and making things happen. That's a good strategy. Throwing some things out, let it simmer and see what happens, and then start working backwards and seeing where to land and make those corrections. That's wisdom, right? So yeah, I would agree that the federal policy and all the stuff that was floated out there caused a lack in consumer confidence. That is true. But was that not by design? Right? Was that not by design? And this is not a political position. This is just, even if I was thinking as a business owner, how do I, as a business owner, know if something's going to work? I have to talk about it. I have to sometimes say things to the group to then get feedback to help me make a decision. So that's the process of coming to a conclusion. And if think about it, if we went through and every single bill that we passed, every regulation that we passed, it was processed the same kind of way, then you as a consumer, as a voter, have more say than you think, than you realize. So the whole idea that you're throwing out all these things might cause disruption to certainty and emotion and angst and all these type of things. That actually leads to being able to lead better and make better decisions. So that's civil discourse. This is where America is so good. This is why we have the freedom of speech and we can get in here and get into the trenches and talk about these things. This is what makes it healthy. This is what makes it work. So yeah, some of these things could be stressful and cause all that turmoil, but in the end, it gives results. So that's what we have to do. But we have to use our wisdom when we approach these type of things, right? So anyway, that's just something to think through. Those are 3 areas that I would agree with, though. I would agree that the consumer confidence, that's something we got to lean into. Real estate agents out there, you guys are the voice of the consumer's confidence, right? We need to be the voice. As real estate agents, we need to be the ones speaking the truth that we find in the data, pointing out the opportunity that we read in these headlines, and not letting the news organizations dictate what the consumer's confidence is. That's our job. We're the ones in the trenches every single day to know what real estate's like. We're the ones representing consumers, not the media. We are. So we need to be the voice to help build the consumer's confidence. We also need to be the ones to understand mortgage rates. We need to understand how they actually correlate to the market. Is that the only number? Is that the only factor that matters? Or is there many more variables where different scenarios make sense for the consumer, coming alongside them and helping them navigate something they don't do hardly ever, but we do every single day? So it's not the media's job, it's not the Fed's job to necessarily correlate what makes the most sense. It's our job as realtors to actually do that, not the media. It's our job, right? And then when you start talking about federal policy, when you start addressing federal policy, well, that's our job too as voters. It's our job as well to pay attention and listen. It's our job as well to lean in as if we are part of the National Association of Realtors, the RPAC advocacy group, understanding what they're standing up on and taking that and voicing our knowledge to our representatives and letting them know what our opinions are. It's our job. That's our job. It's our voices. We are the ones in the trenches knowing what's going on in the housing industry, right? So those 3 categories, if we're going to be good agents and we're going to speak the truth, it's going to be addressing the consumer confidence, telling the truth. It's going to be talking about the mortgage rates and how they correlate to housing and buying and selling. And then we're going to be talking and be very knowledgeable on federal policy. We're going to understand the bills being passed. We're going to understand what they mean and how they're going to affect our local markets. We're going to understand how they affect our consumers and our clients, right? That's our job, right? So what would I say action items? What would I say when you start reading articles like this? What's the takeaway? Where's the opportunity? What I would tell you is this, is knowing those 3 categories, I would look and identify neighborhoods with high concentrations of long-term owners and offer some kind of understanding to them about maybe their life circumstances has changed. Life event has happened and marriage, anything, death even, like certain things have happened that have changed their life, and be the voice of reason to them about, why now is probably a good time to sell or downsize or shift your market around, right? Be the voice and meet those people in those neighborhoods with that high concentration of long-term owners. They're the ones that are sitting on one of those 3 categories. That's what they're doing, right? So that's what I would do. I would become the expert in what right sizing and what policies are going on, mortgage rates, and consumer confidence looks like. I would be that person. I would be a voice for those. Figure out ways to craft videos and social media posts that really address each one of these categories to some degree. That's where you're going to be providing value back to your consumer and your clients, right? That's where it's going to be at. So that's the value. That's the value. That's the play. That's the play for 2026. It really, really is. So, all right. I've got one more article here, and we will, well, maybe 2. I might touch on the 4th one, but it'll be a really brief one. The last one I'll do today is going to be talking about future-proof your home, 2026 smart home energy management ideas. But before we get into that, I got one more thing to talk about in regards to the market, okay? And I know it's a long live stream in regards to, the economy and things, but these are the conversations we're having as real estate agents, guys. Might be boring, but it's important. All right, this article is by Inman News, Inman.com. Its focus is going to be towards the agent, understanding the agent and helping them understand housing affordability. The title is, Why Does Everybody Suddenly Care About Affordability? The brief description, it says, after years of a housing affordability crunch, Congress has weighed in with competing proposals to make homeownership more possible for hopeful buyers. I showed you one of those bills just earlier in the live stream. You guys can go back and watch that if you missed that, if you're just tuning in. But really, it's very interesting. Is the past few months, affordability has literally become the industry's favorite buzzword. I mean, if you look at any single article out there in news, they're talking about the affordability. Why can't we afford a house? Like, how much are homes worth? You know, the whole conversation is affordability, and it rightfully so. But it is kind of like the buzzword. Everybody's trying to figure out a way to put it into their article. But here's where I'm going to like what Inman has to say, right? Because they're asking the tough question. Why now? Why now is affordability the concern, right? So that's what this article is going to be cutting through. It's going to be cutting through a lot of that fear buzzword use of the affordability word. And it's going to look at the primary hurdle for today's consumer. And this is, as real estate agents, this is where we need to really hone in. Like, how do we help our consumers, buyers especially, navigate this market they find themselves in to be able to buy a home? Because I mentioned this last week and the week before even, there is a generation that is having a difficult time affording a house, right? And that's the millennials. I mean, you just think about it. The millennial was in college, or maybe just right out of college, has not had enough time to acquire enough cash, maybe even have kids. They are sitting in a position where homes escalated in price so rapidly that they were completely priced out of the market. So now you got this weird gap right there in the middle of a massive group of buyers that really don't have the income to buy where the homes are right now. So that is part of the reason why the affordability is such a buzzword right now. That's one of the factors, right? Makes sense. So let's go ahead and dive into this. All right, so this is the article here. This was by Christy Murdoch, February 16, 2026. It says, there was a time in the not-so-distant past when the biggest problem homebuyers faced was making sure the kitchen counters were granite and the appliances were stainless steel. This is true. You go out with a buyer and they're just looking at the house like, yeah, I like this. They had like 10 homes they could look at. They all was in their price range, right? They were qualified. They could buy it. And now we're just doing comparisons. I'm looking at the kitchen and bathroom, what I like, what I don't like, all those kind of things, right? That was before the pandemic era housing market drove up demand and home prices, followed by a subsequent rise in interest rates from the historic lows. Those are absolutely massive factors, right? The result has been an ongoing affordability crunch that stymied markets and put homeownership hopelessly out of reach for many younger buyers. Solutions have been floated in the form of pressure on the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, President Trump's favored solution to creative financing concepts, and a call to build millions more homes to improve inventory supply. Now, however, the frequently deadlocked U.S. Congress has started to weigh in, with both the House of Representatives and the Senate creating their own housing affordability plans. Okay, so there's a lot of talk. On all sides of the aisle, everybody's talking. Now, I will say that the whole statement right there where it started to weigh in and there's like this deadlocked in the U.S. Congress, this is the problem. This is the problem with the two-party country in some ways, right? Is you can't get them all to agree because each one wants to get the win. So then they get deadlocked and they can't make a decision, so we're at a stalemate, right? Something needs to give here. All right. What you need to know about the House's new affordability bill by Marion McPherson. All right, the National Association of Realtors came out in favor of a bill by the U.S. House of Representatives called the Housing for the 21st Century Act, which passed last Monday and is headed to the Senate. Now, I talked about this last week as well. I even did a whole little article about this. I have a whole separate video. I have a whole separate video in regards to this as well. And I'm just going to applaud National Association of Realtors because RPAC did. They came out in support. They were bipartisan. They understood what was in this bill needed to happen, and they talked to all representatives pushing this thing through to an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote. So good win, right? NAR strongly supports bipartisan efforts in both chambers to address this crisis, and we believe Congress must act decisively to remove barriers to housing production and reform outdated programs, while giving communities the tools they need to build more homes. NAR statement read, by addressing barriers at the federal, state, and local levels, H.R. 6644 represents the kind of comprehensive approach needed to expand housing opportunities and restore affordability. I absolutely agree. If you're a realtor out there, you would agree with this, I would believe. If you don't, let me know, but I would think like this is exactly our position. Don't play politics with the housing market. right? Everybody needs to buy a house. Like, let's not play politics. Let's look at the data. Let's look at what it says. Make corrections where needed and be diligent in looking at it. But in the end, we got to do something here, right? We've got to address these things. And I mentioned it earlier. Some of these policies that is in our housing affordability plans and regulations was back in 97, and then another revisit in 2017. But nothing's been done post-COVID. So it's time that we've got to do something here. And then you see here, it says the Senate has its own version of an affordability bill, the Road to Housing Act. So the chambers will need to either find common ground on one of the bills or look for an alternative that combines the two. I will say this, I'm reading through both, and I shared one, I did the other one last week. Both have a lot of similarities, but again, each one is posturing themselves to be the one that wants to get through, so one party or the other can claim a win. I honestly don't care. Get together, get the bill done, address the situation, vote on it, and let's start moving forward in the housing sector, right? That's what we need to do. Like, get together and put your heads together, combine these bills, let's make this thing happen. Yeah, we know nothing moves quickly. Here's how much home buying affordability has improved this year. Okay, here is the data that we're getting into now, okay? Affordability is improving in 37 out of the 50 most populous metros in the US as rates come down and incomes rise. Okay, so that's what we just talked about. We just talked about this. 37 of the 50 most populous metros. What we have seen historically is in the metros, the bigger cities first, trickles out into the rural area within 2 to 3 years. That's the way it works. It always has. That's the way it's probably going to continue indefinitely. Big cities that get affected first, it then trickles out. Okay, so we'll pay attention. Pay attention to the metros, tells us a lot. If you're in a rural area, what's coming. All right. However, home ownership is still out of reach for most in pricey coastal markets. Yep, that's absolutely true. Home affordability reaches 4-year high after January rate drop. Okay. Softening rates opened the door for 4.8 million borrowers to refinance their mortgages in January, the highest level in 4 years. However, affordability levels remain below. Okay, so let me just pause for just a second. If you go back to the very beginning of my live stream here, I was showing you the interest rate, and I gave you the graph of the interest rate. And what did I say? I said, look back at 2024 or 2022. 2022 is when the interest rates were spiking up, right? That's when it peaked. It even went up to 8% that year. All right. Notice what they just said in that article, right? They just said it. Softening rates opened the door for 4.8 million borrowers to refinance their mortgages in January, the highest level in what? 4 years. 4 years. So we start talking about like lock-in effect and all this kind of stuff. Your market for listing, and this is where I'm talking to the real estate agents specifically, your market for getting listings is 2022 and on. That's the majority of your sellers right now. Because of why? Well, they don't have a low interest rate. It just said 4.8 million borrowers, the highest record in 4 years to refinance. They're refinancing because they had a higher rate than what we have now. So the whole idea about the lock-in effect, right? The whole idea that those that bought low is we got a problem in the housing market is not necessarily true. That's getting less and less of an issue as we go forward in time. The affordable housing crisis isn't just financial, it's political. American attitudes around home affordability will determine whether Congress treats housing as a priority or as another talking point to be dropped between election cycles. Yep, this is true, and we're mid-season, right? Midterms. So again, political fodder, both sides, doesn't matter. Each one's posturing to do something more. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose as American people. Hopefully that's not what happens. It says affordability comes from small wins, not one big, beautiful bill. Progress will come from dozens of reforms, legislative, regulatory, executive, and local, each removing one obstacle, lowering one cost, or opening one more door, Craig Cheatham writes. 100% true. That's how you fix it. You don't go in and overhaul everything immediately and just make everything just kind of, oh, wait, we're all good now. It's not how it works. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's like floating out ideas, throwing out ideas, getting the consumers' opinions and hearing what they're saying, and then drafting bills accordingly. That's wisdom. That is a great process, right? That is an amazing process to use wisdom to apply it to make writing bills. Now, we just need our U.S. government, our state governments, and our local governments to get together and make this housing affordability bill thing happen. That's what we need to happen. We need to see it, right? We got to see this. Again, go and read these bills. Get in the know. I told you, take the PDFs, upload them to ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever you use, and say extract important key items from this PDF in regards to the housing industry and for real estate agents. And it'll extract everything. You don't have to read the whole bill. Extract it all and read through that and see what the benefits are that are in these bills. Get knowledgeable about what's coming. But again, it's slow progress. So just to summarize this up, right? What we got? Well, we got a housing affordability is at what? A historical low point. Okay? So there's a perception gap going on between what buyers want and what they can afford. That's where we sit. The perception is, I can't buy that because of the situation I'm in. I can't afford it, right? So we now have to begin as real estate agents. We have to shift our minds. We have to begin to understand that it's not just to help the buyer address the affordability gap that we see in this perception gap. We can't just focus on what the monthly payment is. We got to start getting into the weeds about what the total cost of ownership is, right? And that means insurance and taxes and everything else. But we got to know those numbers. So then we go talk to our buyers. We can look and see where they're at. Like, let's say they're renting. What price of home can they buy for the amount of rent that they're paying? What does that payment, the total cost of ownership, look like in correlation to what they are already paying, right? Listen, you agents that can speak fluently about what is happening here, and you can talk with a clear mind about what creative financing or down payment assistance programs or grants or what kind of programs are out there to help your clients, those are the agents that's going to win. They're the ones that's going to win. I truly believe that. So, action items. Begin to craft listing price understanding and understanding the market and seeing what that looks like and how that correlates to the buyer. We got to start talking to our sellers about the actual value of their home. We got to get into the data because a lot of sellers are still overpricing their homes and they're sitting on the market longer than they have in a few years. We got to be able to price those homes effectively so that way we can reduce that affordability gap so the perception gap that the buyer is seeing is less. So it's on us to make sure we understand the data to price homes effectively, right? We've got to understand that. We need to get and meet with lenders. We need to get in and talk to lenders. We need to talk to the lenders we work with and talk to them about buy downs, grants, and different programs and assistance and all those type of things. We need to understand the programs that our lenders are offering for our buyers, right? We need to look and see what that is. All right. We need to explain these things to them. That would be my action items. That's what I would encourage you guys to get involved with lenders and everything else to kind of get in there and understand what's going on. There you go. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap up this show with one last really brief article to get you thinking. This is going to be for homeowners out there, for you, and it's something maybe you can draft some social media posts from. And this is actually by redfin.com, their blog. They have a blog post, and I just pulled this just because it's good advice for homeowners. So this is something maybe you can draft a few things from, okay? So this is all about smart home energy management. So Redfin here is going to be highlighting highlighting the smart home features that are probably saving in technology, that are saving homeowners some money on the more energy efficient side of things and helping them to manage those type of stuff. So I will say this is where, if you go back a few years ago, it was like if you wanted to have like this tech-enabled, energy-efficient home, you had to drop a lot of money to go in and rewire things and do all kinds of crazy things to get this home to be like a smart home. But there are so much small little technology pieces out there now that make it a whole lot easier. And you can just kind of look at this image here. This kind of tells you a story. For those on TikTok, I'm sorry, but I'll describe what's on the screen. So what do you have? Well, you have a phone in the middle. Around it, you have LED light bulbs, you have sensors, and you have plugs that go into a plug with obviously have Wi-Fi enabled. You have smoke detectors, you have smart speakers, you have all of those things, right? That turns a home into a smart home. A lot of these things are for energy management. So this is, we're coming out of a very cold winter. Hopefully we're having warmer weather where I live here in Kentucky, that it's extremely nice. I can't wait to get out in the sun. I've not been able to get out much. I need some vitamin D. So, but anyway, there's a lot of smart tech that's happening here, and really us writing some articles and social media posts and talking about this is a good value add to your consumer. I'm going to skip through this. Smart home energy management is about your devices and appliances, how to control them and how to have them work for you. Companies such as Brilliant Smart Home System have introduced products and product management systems such as phone applications that make it easier than ever to manage your smart home technology. With technology ever changing, let 2026 be the year that you're maximizing modern products to simplify your life. What is smart home energy management? All right, I'm just going to skip down to right here. It says brilliant smart home system president Jonathan Timlock shares how smart home energy management begins with having the right combination of smart home devices working together as a centralized control platform. Timlock specifically calls out open-close HVAC sensors, so the sensors open-close those things, automated thermostat modes, smart shades, bulbs, switches, and plugs. By taking a proactive approach, smart technologies can utilize data to ensure that energy is only used when and where it's needed. So just think about those items right there, right? So you've got this HVAC sensors and like open-close vents and things like that's going on. So when you start putting sensors in certain rooms, instead of having the thermostat in one room, it's monitoring each zone and multiple zones and can adjust the heating and cooling of those zones accordingly by implementing this smart technology. So yeah, this is a benefit to helping your clients for energy efficiency, but it's also a selling point, right? Like just think through this. Like if you were listing a home that had this smart HVAC system with all these sensors, the energy efficiency of that, right? No longer is it just on based on where that thermostat's located and it's blowing air. And how many of you guys have a hot and cold spot in your house because the system is only monitoring the temperature in one room? Typically the more centralized area of the house, but still you have these zones depending on if your house is facing west or east, or north, south, east, west, whatever it is, right? You have these hot pockets, or cold pockets. That's what you see here. So that's a good thing. Automated thermostats that know when you open a door, when you close a door, bulbs that automatically turn on and off, where you don't forget to turn them off, whenever you leave the house. These are all ways to take a proactive approach. It says leveraging smart home technology for efficiency. It says smart thermostats and climate control. It says here, the Energy Star reported that by utilizing a smart thermostat, you can save on average, look at this, 8% of heating and cooling bills or $50 per year. It's not a huge amount, but $50, guys, $50 per year. I'll take that. That's a dinner out with my family. Zoning and remote temperature regulation. We talked about that. Intelligent lighting and shading systems. This is great. Motion sensors and daylight harvesting. Lights turn on only when a room is occupied and dim automatically when sufficient natural light is present. This is a fundamental component of effective smart home energy management. Yeah, just think about that, right? You're leaving a room and the lights just adjust accordingly. That's genius, right? Open close HVAC sensors. We talked about that. Energy efficient LED integration. If you have a newer home, typically everything in your house is LED. My house has every light in my entire house is LED at this point. My exterior lights around the soffits and the kitchen, everything is LED. But updating, if you're an older home, updating everything to LED, that's a massive savings over time. Automated window treatments. This is a big one. You don't really realize how important this one actually is. Now, my house, I would say this is very important, right? Because in my master bedroom, it's on the far end of the house, and it can tend to get hot, really hot in the summer because of where it's located, that zoning issue. So if the automated window treatments know that as the day progresses and the sun starts hitting that area, it closes the blinds and closes the curtains or whatever, it then helps to efficiently cool that room better, and vice versa when it's cold out, right? So that's an automated thing that will save a lot of money. Smart appliances and energy monitoring, real-time usage tracking and alerts, off-peak operation and load shifting. This is hold on, I got to redo TikTok here to let them know I'm still here. Off-peak operation and load shifting. Smart appliances such as dishwashers and clothes washers can be set to run automatically during off-peak hours when utility rates are lower, right? Smart kitchen and laundry appliances. More ways to amplify your smart home. Control music in different rooms, integrate voice assistants, monitor security systems, and so forth. There are some tips here. And choosing a smart home controller. Most of these companies, and I've seen this, there's a lot of homes have a hodgepodge of smart integrations going on. They'll have like one brand doing the plugs, one brand doing the lights, one plug doing the, all these different brands. The really efficient way is to hone in on a specific brand and buy all their sensors, buy all their, plugs and really lean into that. So I would do some research on what those are and then hone in, because really what makes all this work the easiest and most efficient is when you have one app that manages your entire home. All right, that's where this really begins to excel, because I can go into one app and I can see everything that's going on and I can adjust things accordingly. And then, a lot of these apps will also monitor statistics and give you a readout of some data to kind of go from to make, other adjustments. So I think that's just a cool thing. So that's good advice. So there you go. That's some good information. Hopefully you found that helpful. I would, if I was to say some action items for real estate agents, and again, social media is like where it's at. I'm trying to lean in, guys, where I'm getting away from the whole concept of, just look at me type posts to providing value, right? That's my goal here. And this type of information is where you're actually contributing to your consumer with something of value. It's not just talking about your trophies. Like, look, I just sold this house, or I just did this, and look at my new trophy, and all these type of things. If that's all you're posting, what a massive missed opportunity, because this is where I would say, look, you could easily create an energy feature, graphic or flyer or anything talking about the highlight of cost savings that you can find in these type of technologies, right? Going through and giving advice in these type of things is crucial. So why not do some reviews of some of these devices? Like, why not do some reviews of companies that are making a hub that runs all these devices and figuring out which one works the most, and doing some of that research, and then being equipped to answer your clients' conversations when they're talking about energy efficiencies, right? Knowing kind of how these systems work. I would encourage you to do that. Create some social media posts that address energy efficiency and technology. I would build, I would go into your local area and find the auditor that does, like, your local energy auditor. Most electric companies and stuff can have an auditor come out and do free assessments. Sometimes they charge, but sometimes they'll do free assessments. Maybe that's an offer you do for some past clients or something, right? Just revisiting and giving them something of value. Hey, look, I'll do an audit of your home, for free. I'll pay for it or whatever. To audit your home for energy efficiencies or technologies. Just basically helping your clients look beyond just upgrades like paint, carpet, things like that, and go a little bit deeper. Because let's be honest, every agent out there is talking about, hey, yeah, here's what you need to do to update your house. Change your front door, do the garage door, paint the whole house, make sure everything's clean, fix the trim, update some of those things. But they're kind of missing an opportunity here when it comes to energy efficiency and having these sensors put everywhere that actually manages your entire house and reduces the actual operating cost. Because when we go back to what we were talking about before about the affordability gap that we see, guess what? An energy efficient home could be more cost effective for a home buyer. Food for thought. All right, well, that's the end of today, guys. That's all I got for today. I went over by 2 minutes, so that's not too bad. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I do appreciate it greatly for you guys taking the time out to join me here, listen to me talk. I hope it's actually helpful. I mean, the reality is, I'm kind of inviting you into my process that I do every day. I used to just read news articles by myself. I was, from 8 to 9-ish every morning, I would open up and just read through these news articles. And then I got to think, I was like, man, you know what? I'm doing this, and by me talking through this and taking it a little step farther, it's helping me to understand the market better. My goal is to help you understand the market better too, so you can help guide your consumer, your clients much, much better, right? And build a very strong relationship business first, right? All right. Hopefully you have found value. That is your real estate brief for today. If you found this helpful, please consider hitting the like button to tell YouTube you would like more of this type of content. Obviously, truly does help me. And consider subscribing to join a community of real estate agents that are focused on building a business that is relationship focused first. There's more that I could be covering today, but I'm gonna wait until tomorrow. So you can join me tomorrow, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, right here where you're watching me. And until then, have an amazing day. Go out there and build some relationships and make a lot of money. See ya.